there's nothing quite like being edged. Whether it's waiting 2 millennia for a Bloodborne remake that's never going to see the light of day, or a century for me to get to the point, the gaming community has to be one of the most pent-up populations of poor souls. With that said, there was one community that were finally able to drop their load after an 18-year wait. And really, there wasn't a more fitting protagonist to get a HD glow-up. I'm of course talking about the Metroid Prime series, which before the recent release of Metroid Prime 4 had been teetering on the edge of life support for over a decade. As a famous man once said though, if you bitch and complain about something for long enough, then you're still pretty unlikely to get it. In this case though, Nintendo actually pulled through, restoring one of the greatest game series to ever exist. Our goal today? To figure out which of these galactic masterpieces truly is the hardest to complete. Our adventures begin out in the cosmos, where Samus receives a food delivery request on a nearby frigate. Curious as to what could possibly be served on such a dead-end ship, we aura farm the shit out of our own landing procedure before coming to terms with the control schemes of Metroid Prime. What was immediately clear was that this game was a first-person shooter, a concept that didn't strike much confidence in me, especially considering a good portion of the enemies here graduated from acrobatics school. With that said, Retro Studios had taken our dogshit aim into account, ultimately giving us one of the most overpowered lock-on systems in early gaming history. Using it, we were able to dispatch old washed-up enemies on their last legs, as well as other predators who were very clearly taking advantage of the disabled. Before long, we downloaded the map for this area, which only made things harder as you quite literally need a PhD in cartography to understand some of these goddamn layouts. Having exposed our lukewarm IQ once again, we made our way through the rest of the frigate, plastering washed up pirates along the way. Even if you were somehow shit enough to take damage here, because it's the prologue, the enemies essentially heal you with their weapons. We eventually stumbled across the pickup point for our order, only to be interrupted by the meal itself. It would seem as though the chef on duty today was merely an apprentice, as he had quite clearly been inhaled by this parasite queen. If we were to keep our 5-star perfect rating on our deliveries though, there was only one thing for us to do: obliterate this pest and cook up the meal ourselves. Now doing so was actually easier done than said, as this queen couldn't be more inept at putting up a challenge. Her attacks are all incredibly easy to dodge, and outside of the slow moving force fields, she wasn't exactly the tankiest enemy to whittle down with our plasma beam and rockets. Before long, we had this helpless parasite hanging on for dear life, as we slowly watched it drop into our cauldron like a steaming pile of shit. Cooking this behemoth had unfortunately used up the rest of the power available on the ship, and as a result, the ship immediately looked to implode on itself, giving us barely any time to escape.
Okay, we are cooked.
Along the way, we catch a glimpse of Ridley, who does everything in his power to distract us from the fact that we're 3 minutes away from not having a game to play. If that wasn't bad enough though, we also take a random fucking fireball to the forehead, ultimately crippling us to the point where we can't even double jump. Even so, we prided ourselves on being the backbone of society, meaning this food was being delivered broken legs or not. Our route takes us to Talon 4, a luscious planet known for its never-ending cycle of rainfall. It's at this point where it becomes painfully obvious that the game couldn't give less of a shit whether you complete it or not. Forget objective markers, this game doesn't even tell you the goddamn objective when landing on this planet, essentially telling the player to explore to your heart's content. The caveat to all of this is Samus's ability to scan almost anything, which fills her logbook with important information about objects, enemies, and the potential STDs you'd contract should you ever feel curious enough to engage in sexual intercourse with said enemies.
What?
For now though, I thought it best that we take our time to explore our surroundings as we discover doors that can't be opened just yet and countless organic life forms, most of which want us dead. We end up at a supposed elevator, which was apparently such a huge discovery as it warranted its very own cutscene. Interestingly, it leads us to a whole separate area called the Chozo Ruins, and it's here where we come across our very first power-up of the game. Now, it wouldn't be a Metroid game if every single power-up wasn't guarded by an enemy of some sorts, and I got to say, they really pulled out all the stops when designing this one. This here is a totem pole that shoots wasp fuckers out of its ass, and if that wasn't bad enough, these suckers had evidently spent a whole training arc with Sonic the fucking Hedgehog, as you'd have a better chance winning the lottery than locking onto them. Despite that, this is a fairly easy encounter, and before long we'd claim the missile launcher. As the name suggests, this bad boy lets us unload a nuclear missile at the push of a button, meaning we can finally destroy those vibranium padlocks resting on specific doors. we're also greeted by our first energy tank, which significantly increases the amount of time we can be bent over. These are some of the most important collectibles in the game, as for whatever reason, the vast majority of our enemies won't stay dead no matter how many times you annihilate them from existence. Not only that, but the further we explore, the more dangerous the enemies become. Whether it's hentai rejects that constantly knock you up, or plated beetles that have quite obviously eaten far too many spicy curries.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
The enemies going forward will keep you in a constant state of irritation. Having filled this beetle's rectum with enough plasma energy to power the closest stadium, we inevitably acquire the Morph Ball, but its usefulness really only steps up a tier once we destroy another mini-boss. For whatever reason, we're once again facing off against an inanimate object that momentarily releases these cancerous wasps every phase of the fight. Similarly to its beaked counterpart though, this fight isn't much of a challenge, and in its wake lies the coldest power-up to ever exist. With it, we're able to drop highly condensed farts, which have so much gas stored in them that they're able to propel us up into the air, meaning we can reach hidden secrets like our second energy tank. With the galaxy's deadliest biochemical weapon now stored in our power suit, we ventured forth into the sun chamber to meet the local gardener who had placed the food order to begin with. It soon became obvious, however, that there was no local garden keeper, and instead, it was the garden itself that had placed the order. Unfortunately, we hadn't packed nearly enough food for this behemoth, and as you can imagine, he wasn't too happy to hear this. Unluckily for him though, company policies entailed that should a customer have any sort of problem with our delivery service, they'd have to be obliterated immediately. And in Flagra's case, this meant being burnt down back into a flaccid state. See, while we're unable to directly damage Flagra, pumping it with enough shots puts it into a dazed state, giving us just enough time to realign those massive mirror arrays. Doing so puts Flagra to sleep, giving us just enough time to leave a surprise at its base. Given it's the first real boss of the entire game, it isn't a particularly hard fight, although it does require us to be fairly quick, as the number of mirror arrays increases with each phase. With Flagra vanquished, we're able to turn the now barren sun chamber into our own personal gym, as we get what may be the biggest pump our deltoids have ever experienced. The Varia suit is the closest thing some of us will ever get to sunscreen, as it allows us to venture forth into extremely hot environments, which just so happens to be the very next location we need to explore. It's here where we're introduced to some of the more annoying enemies, whether that's these wheezing wannabes that drop toxic clouds following their destruction, or these goddamn assholes whose only purpose for existing is to chew us up and spit us out like some hot garbage. The most lethal aspect in this entire region, however, was the brain-dead specimen holding the controller. Oh, in the fucking love. Oh, for fuck's sake! Oh, shit! Shit, how the fuck? Oh my god, I'm so fucking shit. Get me the fuck out of this lava. Oh my god. Having deep fried ourselves in lava, a cool respite became our #1 goal, and thankfully, it wasn't long before we discovered another lift, this one taking us to the Fendrana Drifts, an area so cold, it quite literally caused my recording software to freeze and crash. What? Wait, what? Oh, for fuck's sake, man. To my surprise though, we're able to walk through this icy water without taking any damage, a luxury honestly, given how many old platformers instantly clapped your cheeks the moment you touched any form of liquid. These types of luxuries were few and far between, however, as this icy region contained some of the toughest enemies we'd come across so far. The first ones to really give us some problems were these she-goths, who were impervious to damage from the front. This meant we'd have to strafe around them in order to deliver some devious backshots. Yet again, this was easier said than done, especially considering these creatures were allergic to travelling alone, as they always seemed to have their butt buddy alongside them. As concerning as this was though, it wouldn't be long before I realised that it wasn't just the bigger, more intimidating enemies that had gotten tougher. See, even these smaller critters had me considering taking a hand grenade to the nutsack, as they'd constantly find new ways to expose my god-awful aim. Pathetic displays aside, we had to move on, and after a quick flex of our telekinesis abilities, we go on to claim the boost ball upgrade for ourselves. Once again, this upgrade was too much for my recording software to handle, as moments later it completely shit itself.
Well, this sucks.
As you'd probably expect, our newest upgrade allows us to boost while in morph ball form, meaning we can blitz our way up curved surfaces like this makeshift half-pipe here. As we made our way back to the Magmore chambers, we took some time to take in the breathtaking sights, only for them to be completely overshadowed by Ridley, the king of aura farming. As annoying as this was, we didn't let it get to us, as we perfectly navigated the molten caverns once again. Oh, for fuck's sake, oh my, I'm sorry, shit. Eventually we ended up back in Talon's rainy overworld, where we used our new boost ball abilities to retire Tony Hawk. Moving around the outskirts of the landing site had granted us access to a rather peculiar door, a door that housed one of the best upgrades we've received so far. With our new space boots tightly wrapped around our legs, I spent the next 5 minutes completely bewildered as to where the fuck we were supposed to go next. Thankfully, I had my one and only friend right next to me, and believe it or not, they were a massive Metroid fan themselves. According to them, we had to make our way back to the Fendrana Drifts, and more specifically, the Chapel of Elders, where we're thrown into an orgy of baby sheargoths. As fun as this dance was, it really wasn't doing much for us. I guess in the end, size does matter after all.
In danger!
As you can probably tell, this here is the Mama Sheargoth, and contrary to her smaller counterparts, she's completely impervious to backshots. Instead, the only way to damage her is to shoot an explosive load directly into her mouth while it's agape. Sus comments aside, this wasn't exactly an easy thing to achieve, as the lock-on feature would always redirect itself towards the massive spikes on her back, meaning we'd need to free aim most of our missiles, a skill that I hadn't quite mastered yet. Even so, her movements and attack patterns are all rather straightforward, making for another intimidating yet simple boss fight. Following her defeat, we're rewarded with the Wave Beam, the first of 3 unique beams we'll be acquiring. Not only does this beam allow us to destroy enemies that were previously impervious to our damage, it can also be used to open up wave doors, meaning we can finally venture forth into new areas.
Fuck me!
It's at this point where the game really starts to up the ante, as we're introduced to the Space Pirates, a group of sentient aggressors who are looking to become the dominant force in the entire galaxy. Unfortunately for them, however, it doesn't matter how cool you looked with your scythe blades. If you're flinching and toppling over from a mere ass charge shot, you've got no hope when it comes to dominating the galaxy. The pirates knew that though, and before long, we'd been introduced to not only flying pirates, but also ones that are able to cloak themselves. These unique variants are especially annoying, as the flying ones will quite literally turn themselves into homing missiles following their death, whereas the cloaked ones, well, jump scare the shit out of you. Ignoring the fact that these pirates never seemed to have any treasure, we made our way into a research lab, which housed some rather peculiar entities. Curious, we looked to blast open these containment units, only to be met with the namesake of this entire franchise, the Metroids. Luckily for us though, it seems a few hundred years inside those containment units had fried any semblance of aggression. Working our way through this lab eventually led us to the command center, where after dealing with a few more flying pirates, we grabbed our first new visor. The thermal visor, as you can imagine, lets us see heat signatures even in the pitch black dark, which is a blessing in disguise as the control system immediately shits itself, cutting all power to the research lab. We're then bum rushed by some more space pirates, and while they aren't the toughest of enemies, the constant eye strain imposed on us when using this visor made it all the more challenging. Things would only go from bad to worse, however, as we come face to face with a sentry drone. These assholes come equipped with their very own counter UAV, as our visor is constantly jammed while in their presence. I can't even begin to tell you what the fuck is going on here, only that I was shitting myself the entire time. The prolonged use of this thermal visor had given us a brain aneurysm, which wasn't ideal considering we soon stumbled into the quarantine cave. As its name suggests, this cave was used to quarantine a chronically ill patient back in 2002 when this game released, and unfortunately for us, that patient was never released. Spending over 2 decades in isolation had taken its toll on this patient, who was now suffering from an extreme case of rigor mortis, and to no one's surprise I'm sure, he wasn't exactly happy to see us. Thardus is a far tougher fight than Fladra, as he constantly stirs up a temper tantrum, blocking our field of view throughout the entire fight. This results in us having to constantly switch between our combat visor and the thermal visor to pinpoint his weak points, which is somewhat awkward as we can't exactly see his attacks while using the thermal visor. He's also got this rather annoying ability where he himself tucks himself into a ball and rolls around the arena, crushing everything in sight. It may look like a fairly slow attack, but it definitely caught me off guard quite a few times. Even so, we did eventually put this poor bastard out of his misery before claiming the Spider Ball as a reward. This power-up essentially turns us into Spider-Man, if Spider-Man could only stick to very specific rail tracks that most of the time led to absolutely nothing.
Am I a joke to you?
Now, as dogshit as this sounds, it did mean we could go back and collect quite a few power-ups in the form of missile upgrades, more missile upgrades, and fuck, I guess it's just missile upgrades. Eventually we entered the Hall of the Elders, which also introduced the Chozo Ghost, an enemy that constantly phases between the ethereal planes. This makes them extremely painful to fight, as they'll quite literally phase out of your strongest attacks. Thankfully, there's only one of these idiots at this point, meaning it didn't take long for us to get back to our favourite pastime, being abused and used as a bowling ball by this massive statue. This chain of abuse didn't stop there though, as we spent the next 10 minutes being chewed up and spat out by these munted toads. You could say this abuse was all worth it though, as we did end up acquiring the ice beam as a result of these struggles. Yet, as powerful as this new beam was, it didn't necessarily stop us from getting our ass pounded by a bunch of Chozo ghosts moments later. This wasn't a one-off occurrence either, as by this point, the developers had stopped giving a fuck about enemy variety as they spawned these motherfuckers in every room moving forward. Following the collection of another Chozo artifact, we quickly dipped back to the Fendrana Drifts, where upon seeing yet another Mama Sheegoth, this time posing as a regular ass enemy, we fuck right back off to the overworld of Talon, where we find a secret cavern hiding by a waterfall. This led to an entire underwater section where we faced off against the slowest moving pirate variants in the entire game. By this point, I'd also discovered just how powerful it was combining an ice beam shot with a missile, as it essentially one-hit most enemies, these aqua pirates included. Conquering these underwater caverns ultimately led us to the Phazon Mines, an area in which racism was at its peak. See, the pirates here had somehow segregated themselves into multiple groups, each pertaining to a particular beam in which they sourced their power from. Thankfully though, this meant they were particularly susceptible to their own beam weapon system, as they'd never expect to be getting attacked by one of their own. Following this, we took part in a quick demolition course, which was so frightening that it caused the local alien life to shit themselves. And if there's one thing that no one enjoys, it's swimming around in a containment unit of their own shit, so it's only fair that they'd want to break out. Unfortunately, he chose the worst possible time to do so, as following a few super missiles to the forehead, he was terminated. Thankfully, the gas released from his butthole following his death acted in a similar fashion to an EMP, as it immediately shut down the surrounding systems. As important as this was, it also meant that the ventilation system had been shut down, which wasn't ideal considering we were right below the planet's main sewerage dump. Having spent the better part of 10 minutes inside what could only be described as my toilet following a spicy curry night, we continued to make our way through the Omega sector, dispatching Metroids and troopers as we saw fit. Our main goal here was to grab the grapple beam, which allows us to impersonate Tarzan as we swing our way back to the overworld. On our way, we grab yet another Chozo artifact before picking up our second visor upgrade. Now, despite having the tools to now open our very own health service, we instead chose to use our new X-ray for evil, as we obliterated everyone who had even a semblance of a tumor. At this point, a lot of our objectives revolved around powering up our arsenal. This saw us craving the Wave Buster as well as the Ice Spreader, two important upgrades for our elemental beams. Following this, we worked our way through one of the coldest morphal puzzles yet, where we were rewarded with our final beam upgrade, the Plasma Beam. With our weaponry stacked to the high heavens, the developers knew there wasn't an enemy in sight that could possibly pose any threat, and instead looked to up the challenge in other ways, namely by cutting every source of light in the vicinity. This left us at quite the crossroads. See, we could either go at it blind, and I mean like literally blind, as you can't see fucking shit at times. Or we could use our tumor-inducing visors, which honestly weren't much better. As we stumbled our way through each of the Metroid-filled research quadrants, we eventually came across a rather imposing containment unit. Now, considering it was still intact, there was a good chance we'd be able to sneak past this behemoth.
2 seconds later.
Yeah, no chance. As a famous man once said, everything happens for a reason, and while I wasn't looking forward to the ass clapping we were about to receive, it would all be worth it in the end. Now, all things considered, the Omega Pirate isn't too tough of a boss. In fact, the hardest part of the entire fight is when we've hurt him badly and he needs to call in his little butt buddies as a distraction. Outside of these assholes, however, the fight really just comes down to using the correct visor at the right time. Using the X-ray visor will expose the coward as he's charging himself up with Phazon, and following a few plasma blasts, he's down for the count. Awkwardly enough though, he looks to get in one last hug before passing away, although all this seems to do is supercharge us with the most powerful suit in existence. Ironically enough, this suit was all we really needed to deal with the pest problem infecting this planet, but first, we had to desecrate the Holy Temple of the Chozo, and the only way to do this was to collect all 12 Chozo artifacts. Doing so was easier said than done, however, as by this point, every enemy type had seemingly gone through an evolutionary cycle. The Metroids had seemingly learnt how to perform mitosis out of thin air, and the Sheegoths had doubled in size and ferocity, and the flying pirates, well, these guys still kinda just suck. Because of these new dangers though, it was imperative that we picked up as many weapon upgrades as possible while on our quest for Chozo artifacts. Collecting the actual artifacts themselves was a fairly peaceful endeavor though, as most of them simply required us to Google where the fuck they were. The last artifact, however, was embedded in another elite enemy. An enemy who got absolutely obliterated within 20 seconds. With the final artifact collected, we returned to the artifact temple in the hopes of wiping it off the face of this planet. What can only be described as a miracle though, the bright lights of the artifacts drew the attention of Ridley, the same bastard who had almost got us killed back on the frigate back at the start of the game. This was perfect. Not only could we get our revenge, we could also use the collateral damage from the fight to speed up the destruction of this pathetic temple. Now, on paper, this plan was perfect. What I hadn't accounted for, however, was just how tough this winged bastard was going to be. His first few phases aren't too bad, albeit a little inconvenient, where he spends 3 business days up in the air where we can't even damage him. Despite that, however, the real challenge begins when Ridley drops to about 25% of his total HP. See, at this point he just goes absolutely berserk, spamming charge attacks and tail whips like he's on crack. The increased aggression is one thing, but the difficulty lies in hitting him in the mouth with the charged shot, which stuns him just long enough to get another hit in on his core with a super missile. The time frame in which you get to do this though decreases as his aggression increases, meaning by the end of the fight you've barely got enough time to get any damage in. In the end though, all the quick movements had raised Ridley's heart rate to such an extreme level that he suffered a heart attack mid-fight. And with them out of the way, we could finally make our way towards the impact crater. Considering this was where Metroid Prime had bunkered down, it didn't come as a surprise that every room was loaded with fission Metroids. That said, the fact that there seemed to be no end to them, no matter how many are destroyed, was a concerning sight, especially when their only purpose seemed to be knocking us down to the bottom of this tower. Through sheer will alone though, we did manage to climb our way up to the Holy Infusion Chamber, where the ultimate test lay waiting for us. As you'd expect, Metroid Prime is by far the toughest enemy in the entire game, featuring multiple phases each with their own complexities to them. His first few phases see him switch between multiple forms, each with their own set of attacks. The catch here is that we can only damage him with a beam that matches the highlights on his body, and considering we're only given a small hitbox in the form of his eyes, it makes certain beams extremely hard to use against him, all the while it's bombarding us with attacks that do an immense amount of damage, and it's no wonder the Chozo did everything in their power to seal this monstrosity away. After dealing with his first few phases, we find him melting away at the bottom of this cavern, although we weren't able to celebrate just yet, as it had merely shed its skin to reveal its core essence. This second phase is arguably even worse than its first one, as it requires us to switch between our visors to even see him, let alone his attacks half the time. Not only that though, throughout the fight it'll summon countless smaller Metroids, all of which just become a huge pain in the ass as we're constantly taking chip damage from every angle, all while trying to keep track of Prime, who's dashing in and out of his different forms. After a relentless struggle, we're able to beam it down in hyper mode, ultimately putting an end to this infectious nuisance. In a last-ditch effort to farm some DLC off us, Prime here pulls off our Phazon suit, absorbing it into a massive explosion as we barely jump to survival. We take it upon ourselves to provide one last thirst trap for the fans before leaving Talon for good. This brings us to the end of the first game in this marvelous franchise, but not before teasing us with an ominous ending cutscene where we see an arm pop up. Now, this is where we run into our first problem. See, I didn't die a single time during my entire playthrough, something that we can only hope changes in the following games. After a much needed holiday, we find ourselves back in our trusty vessel, with our main task being to track down a group of crackheads. Admittedly, we hadn't checked the weather app before leaving, which ultimately bit us in the ass as we tried our best to fly through a lightning storm. As if things couldn't get any worse though, the fact that we'd paid off our flying instructors to get access to the ship in the first place was becoming all the more obvious, as we're almost immediately struck by lightning and forced to crash land on this mysterious planet. Despite that pathetic display, we didn't let it take away from the fact that our departing procedure, which was still ice cold in its execution. And before long, we'd gotten started on our objective once again. Like its predecessor, Prime Echoes uses this first area as a means to teach the player all of Samus's abilities. We still have access to her double jump, the morph ball, and even the missile launcher, 3 crucial abilities that I'd hate to lose again.
2 seconds later.
Anyway, let's rewind a bit. After disembarking from our ship, we make our way through some rather sketchy rooms. Some of them even have the hanging remains of the supposed crackheads, which in of itself is a rather pleasant sight as it means less work for us in the long run. What wasn't a pleasant sight, however, was watching these same crackheads rise from the dead, very obviously infected with the same drug they'd looked to inhale in the first place. Thankfully, these idiots are extremely immobile and barely have any firepower, meaning we could dust them off quite easily. Before long, we'd entered a room with a mysterious portal, although it wasn't the portal that had garnered our attention. No, instead it was a figure that resembled us of all people, and the most annoying part about all of this was that they somehow looked cooler than we did. Annoyed at this realization, we jumped through the portal only to fall into one of the biggest traps possible as we're quickly surrounded by these tentacled freaks. You couldn't possibly imagine the horrors that come from being dogpiled by a bunch of alien freaks with tentacles, yet the worst part of this entire experience was losing all of our trusty upgrades. With the crackheads clearly taken care of, our objective quickly switched to recovering our power suit upgrades, the first of which being the missile launcher. We also get a quick insight into the terrible ordeal that took place on this planet, although if we're being truthful, we couldn't give less of a fuck as we really did need to move on and find these power-ups. Downloading the area map from the nearby ship once again confirmed the need for a PhD in fucking eyesight.
Oh my god, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is what? What the fuck is what? Yeah, what the fuck is what? What are you looking at? What did you see? Talk to me. Tell me what you saw.
From here we look to make our way towards the Great Temple. The only thing waiting for us here, however, was an ambush, as we're essentially shoehorned into our first boss battle with this Splinter here. Given the fact that this is one of the earliest boss battles, it wasn't too hard to strafe this thing's attacks before dishing out some lethal damage of our own. Once defeated, it leaves behind a strange ball of energy, who after showing off its movement potential, wallops itself straight into our power suit, charging us back up to 100%. With this new mysterious power coursing through our veins, we take an elevator up to the first of 3 temples, where we meet with a floating moth. He fills us in on the dark entities that have infected this planet and their obsession with light. As a result, these Ing have siphoned most of the light energy out of the planet, and as you'd expect, Umos being a moth wasn't too happy about this. With another begging sods request added to our list, we grab our first energy tank before strutting our way over to the Aegon Wastes. It's here where we start seeing a unique blend of enemies, from demented desert slugs to extremely rapid bat-like creatures that immediately bait out the fact that we're abusing the lock-on feature. Similar to its predecessor, none of the enemies encountered so far put up much of a fight. In fact, they might be even weaker than the enemies in Metroid Prime. Now, upon hearing this, the game almost immediately threw us into another boss battle, or at least I think it was a boss battle, because despite there being a whole ass cutscene, I've had tougher fights against customer service workers than this guy. Disappointment aside, he leaves behind one of my favorite upgrades, the Morph Ball Bomb, and using it we're able to make our way to the other side of the Aegon Temple and onwards to the energy controller. It's here where we meet with the deceased Luminoth, who tells us we'll essentially need to step foot into the Shadow Realm in order to steal back the light energy that had been stolen. This is where the dark portals come into play, as each one connects to a parallel space in the dark ether world. The first thing to note of this alternative dimension are these force field looking areas. See, these force fields will become our best friend throughout this entire playthrough, as they're pretty much the only space in which Samus's power suit doesn't take constant damage from the toxic gas oozing out of these dark creatures' butt cheeks. There are certain upgrades that help mitigate this damage, but for now, we just need to take our time moving through the Dark Aegon Waste as we look to track down the first of 3 Dark Temple keys. The enemies present in the Dark Ether world are far more annoying than any we've witnessed in the Light world. For one, they love delaying their attacks, which only makes it all the more difficult to avoid. And not only that, but they always end up sinking into the goddamn floor, making them even harder to hit. Our little skirmish with these warriors ultimately led into our second boss fight against the Jump Guardian, and as you'd expect from his name, this guy used to be a hopeful athlete, striving to participate in the Olympics. Unfortunately for him though, he was far too shit to ever make it, and instead, he's here, mopping the floors of the Dark Ether. Now, as agile and rapid as this guy is, the fact that we spend the whole fight inside a force field means we're constantly having our health restored throughout the entire fight. As a result, it doesn't really matter how many times this guy hits us with his attacks, as we're more than likely to heal it all up moments later. Following its defeat, we earn back our space jump boots, allowing us to double jump our way towards the first Dark Temple key. With the key in hand, we fight our way back to the portal, which we use to travel back to the Light World, only to be immediately ambushed by some familiar faces. As omnipresent as these space pirates are, I do think they have been deployed far too early here. Either that, or this lot was constipated, as they didn't seem nearly as swift as their predecessors. They're also quite brain dead, as we find them trying to speedrun their own deaths moments later. Lukewarm IQ aside, we roll our way through someone's rectum only for the party to dissipate upon our arrival. And as humbling as this was, who could blame them for leaving when this was the host? Having eviscerated the party vibes, we looked to confront our dark counterpart. What I hadn't realized, however, was just how agile she was. It's a good thing most of her attacks are easy to dodge, as it was already hard enough to keep track of her. Her larger AoE attacks do a decent amount of damage, and the moment she drops to under half of her HP, she starts going absolutely ballistic, bomb diving her way towards us at all times. Despite being the toughest boss so far, there's only room for one main character in this franchise, and unfortunately for Dark Samus here, the story laid out by the developers meant she had no chance of becoming that. Having discharged all the stress built up inside of her, she dissipates into an endless array of sparkles, but not before granting us access to our first elemental beam upgrade. With the Dark Beam added to our arsenal, we pick up our second Dark Temple key before acquiring yet another beam upgrade in the form of the Light Beam. With the power of light embedded in our plasma cannon, we had no problem dispatching an army of Ing warriors, who ended up coughing up the final Dark Temple key. With all three keys in our possession, all that remained for us to do was to make our way to the Dark Temple, where we came face to face with this franchise's iteration of the massive worm boss. This multi-headed worm is honestly pretty easy. Not only are there multiple force fields around the arena, but these worms are highly susceptible to light attacks, being unable to tank even a single charged light shot. Following this, the heads will attempt to suck us up, which is perfect as it gives us the perfect opportunity to hand deliver some festering feces right to their core. After repeating this process a few times, our Morbis can no longer handle the resulting stomachache and will instead cough up the Dark Suit. This suit drastically decreases the damage we take in the Dark Realm, and it may be one of the best upgrades in the entire game, as I can't tell you how much time I've spent completely lost in these alternate worlds. So if I go over... Wait, where the fuck am I supposed to go? Oh, wait, no, was I supposed to do that? Oh, I'm so fucking retarded. Regardless, we sucked the light power back up into our transfer module before returning to the Aegon Temple in the Light Realm, where we shoot our new load straight back into the generator, restoring power to the entire temple in the process. The Luminoth, visibly impressed, couldn't help but pledge their allegiance to us in honor of our godlike abilities. Self-glazing aside, we weren't done just yet. In fact, we had barely gotten started, and after meeting back up with Umos, we're told that there's a concerningly high amount of Ing activity over in the Torvus sector. The swamplands here are home to some of the most annoying enemies in the entire game, and it didn't take long for us to stumble across them. These electrifying beasts work in a similar fashion to the She-Goths in Metroid Prime, mainly in relation to their weakness being backshots. Comparatively, however, these guys are much more dangerous than the She-Goths, mainly due to their aggressive charges and quick lightning attacks. The fact that they never travel alone only adds to the challenge, meaning we need to constantly be moving to avoid taking substantial damage. Having dealt with these Crenchulars, we make haste for the Torvus Temple, where we're ambushed by an army of space pirates. The good news is that these idiots still moved like they'd been holding in a shit for weeks. Because we felt bad for them, we didn't waste any time putting them out of their misery, and as a reward for our kind gesture, the lasers guarding the super missile upgrade miraculously disappeared. As we continue up the temple, we meet with another moth, who echoes the desire for us to restore light to its temple. With our objective clearly set, it then became a question of where the fuck we were supposed to go. Because this game centers around two alternative worlds, both of which are connected to each other to the point that changes in one dimension are often reflected in the other, it can get extremely confusing as to where we're supposed to go next. That said, smashing our face against the wall in defiance wasn't going to do us much good, and after a good 20 minutes of being lost, we did trigger another cutscene. A cutscene that introduced some of the beefiest enemies yet. These are the Pirate Commandos, and boy are they tanky. Their attacks don't necessarily strike fear into the hearts of their enemies though, but the fact that they can tank multiple super missiles isn't something to scoff at. What we can scoff at is my dogshit recording ability. See, following our skirmish with the Pirate Commandos, we traverse into the Dark Torvus dimension where we take on the Boost Guardian. Me being the dumbass that I am though, completely forgot to hit the record button, so really all I can say is that this was by far the toughest boss fight so far, as most of it required us to be in our morph ball form. Either way, defeating him rewards us with the Boost Ball, which we can use to reach our first Dark Temple key in this region. We make way for the Light World once again, where we're forced into a pretty scuffed puzzle using our new Boost Ball ability. Despite this puzzle taking far longer than I'd ever like to admit, the reward was both worth it and required to continue onwards. Our next stop was over at the Hydro Dynamo Station, the first area in which the majority of our movement takes place underwater. Unfortunately, we'd just come back from an all-you-can-eat buffet, meaning we couldn't exactly jump while underwater. Thankfully, jumping wasn't needed to sink to the bottom of this shithole, where we once again caught a glimpse of our own worst enemy. Fortunately, we don't have to face off against her just yet, although if I'm being honest, I'd much rather face her than a massive alpha sea slug whose only weak point is exposed for about half a millisecond. This here is the Alpha Blog, named after the constant blogs that have been written once players realize just how fucking bullshit this fight really is. Despite only having 2 attacks pretty much, the Alpha Blog somehow manages to be one of the most infuriating fights in the entire game, and this solely comes down to the timing required. See, between his watery spray attacks and his charge attacks, there's only a very brief window in which you can launch a super missile to damage him. Should you be even a millisecond off, you're getting fucking railed by massive damage. The delayed timing also means it's practically impossible to dodge out of the way, as you'll always be too late and get caught regardless. Out of every boss fight so far, this was the closest any had gotten to actually killing me, which is honestly kind of embarrassing. Having barely escaped death's door, we take the portal back to the Dark World where we find our second Dark Temple key. This once again left us with one last key to track down, although the Ing definitely weren't going to make this an easy task, as they'd started to send out their elites. The Hunters in particular were quite a handful, as they'd constantly phase in and out of existence. That said, it didn't matter which monstrosity was sent our way, we weren't going to let any of them derail us from completing our objective, which saw us fighting our way towards the sacrificial chamber. Now, as intimidating as that name sounds, we're not the ones being sacrificed. In fact, the developers were nice enough to place a sacrificial lamb in our place. The only problem was that this guy hadn't agreed to it. Whereas the Alpha Blog was dogshit due to its timing windows, the Grapple Guardian here kinda just sucks because of his poor design. The fight itself is extremely easy, mainly due to the fact that you can always stay within these safe zones, which constantly heal any damage we take. The frustrating part of this fight, however, is just how finicky this guy's grapple beam is. Half the time he's just shooting blanks, and the other times you don't have enough time to get behind him because he's up against a wall or the lock-on system on his backside is just AIDS to deal with. The fight felt like a total slogfest, where we're constantly tiptoeing around these pillars for minutes on end, only to be rewarded with half a second window to deal damage to him. Even if it did take us a few centuries though, we did manage to defeat him, which was a positive outcome as we not only acquired the grapple beam as a result, we also managed to snag a dark beam upgrade, as well as the final Dark Temple key. In the hopes of siphoning back this light energy, we proceeded to take these 3 keys to the Dark Torvus Temple. What I hadn't expected to do, however, was to fight off some fat ass lava that somehow swam at the speed of light, despite having a body that causes tidal waves any moment it moves. The real struggle, however, takes the form of an adult version, which bursts through the massive cocoon in front of us. This phase of the fight has us making use of our new grapple beam as we swing our way around this flying monstrosity in hopes of cutting off its marvelous wings. Doing so causes the flying bug to fall into the toxic waters below, only to emerge moments later with a massive tumor on its tail. As any professional healthcare worker will know, tumors need to be dealt with the moment they're spotted, and in our case, the only tools we had were elemental beams. As you can imagine though, this did result in quite some collateral damage, so while we did terminate the tumor, the Chika followed alongside it. Unbothered, we grab our first visor upgrade, which helps reveal hidden platforms, which we immediately put to use as we climb our way to the top of the temple. Again, we siphon the shit out of this light energy before pumping our load straight back into the alternate temple's generator. As orgasmic as this feeling was, I doubt it could compare to the joy felt by the Illuminoth as we restored power to yet another temple. Following this, we checked in with Umos once again, who pointed us in the direction of their very own fortress. Now, despite Umos referring to it as their temple, I couldn't help but notice that this fortress was occupied by every conceivable entity apart from the Illuminoths. See, we've got to deal with space pirates, moving nutsacks, Beyblading mechs, and even some goddamn Tetris blocks that are arguably some of the most annoying enemies in the entire game, as they can completely shut down your abilities with their EMPs. Despite all of that though, the worst was yet to come. See, after trying out the local public transport, we're forced into a chamber with the Spider Guardian, a boss that can only be defeated entirely in our morph ball form. Not only do we have the movement capabilities of a second-hand tractor, the timing required when dropping off our farts needs to be absolutely perfect. The further on into the fight it gets, the tougher the arenas are, and the less likely it becomes that I'd give this game a good rating. By some miracle, however, we managed to guide this dumbass thing towards its own death. Having dispatched yet another pest, we follow the pipe towards our next upgrade, the Spider Ball. This once again lets us attach ourselves to the rail tracks on the walls, many of which led to hidden upgrades that we really can't afford to miss. With every conceivable upgrade collected, we use our new power to navigate this massive gap, jumping from track to track like some kind of superhero wannabe. Our next goal saw us returning to the Hydro Chamber, which had been taken over by another Guardian. Just like the Spider Guardian, we had to approach approach this fight in Morph Ball form as we look to dodge the constant nuclear spam. What makes this fight particularly infuriating, however, is the explosive radius of these attacks. Even slightly grazing the outskirts of the explosion will knock you back down without fail, which tilted me far more than it should have. At the end of the day though, this fight's all about patience and planning, two attributes I've put no spec points into during my entire life. Even without those things though, I knew my stubbornness would pull through, and after another millennia or so, we managed to place the final bomb, crushing the Guardian in the process. As a reward for our troubles, we earned back the Power Bomb upgrade, which we can use to blow open yellow plated doors. Doing so grants us access to the Great Wind Chamber, although there's not much we can do here at the moment. Instead, we need to travel through this conveniently placed dark portal as the other dimension has working spinner systems. By lining up these system control rings on this tower, we're able to drop in some grapple points back in the light dimension. Using these grapple points, we're able to reach the platform at the back of this area, which houses its very own Morph Ball cannon. This shoots us up to the top of the tower, where the Sunburst upgrade is waiting for us. With our freshly upgraded arsenal, we make our way back to the Sanctuary Fortress, where we're greeted at the door by some of the most intimidating security guards known to man. Fittingly named the Ing Smashers, these honking units attack with the force of a small sun, meaning you really don't want to get hit by them. Thankfully, due to their size, their attacks are quite infrequent and easy to avoid. Don't get me wrong though, they're extremely tanky, and should you find yourself in a tight corridor with more than one of them, just prepare yourself for an ass whooping. Following that close call, we play a few rounds of Bejeweled, skate around the ring of this energy ball and watch in horror as our dark counterpart absolutely obliterates a group of space pirates with a single shot. Now credit where credit's due, this was an impressive display of strength, although it didn't fill me with too much confidence considering we were next on her chopping block.
I'm fucking shitting myself.
Surprisingly though, Dark Samus here hasn't learned too many new tricks since our last encounter. Sure, she's still agile and somewhat hard to hit, but none of her newer attacks deal that much damage. The biggest annoyance comes from her phasing out of existence, as it forces us to use our Dark Visor to see her. With that said, after a few super missiles to the forehead, she's down for the count once again. Now, if you were expecting a cool upgrade, I'm going to have to disappoint you, as we collect the Echo Visor. The worst visor by far, as you can barely see anything outside of these sound waves. It's almost like that's the entire point of the visor, you fucking idiot. Complaining aside, we do need this visor to obtain our first Dark Temple key in this region. From there, we headed back on to main research, where I contracted chlamydia from this goddamn caretaker drone, as it fucked me over and over again. This motherfucker doesn't even have a cutscene to introduce it, yet it proved to be one of the most challenging sections of the entire game. Having to constantly jump between spider tracks is one thing, but to do it precisely enough to not only dodge the countless obstacles flying your way, but also hit the enemy's weak spot is no easy feat. Not only that, but with each new phase, the spider tracks become smaller and smaller, to the point where one mistimed jump can result in us taking some massive damage. Thankfully, I managed to clutch up, but the sorry state of our health bar going forward was cause for concern. Fortunately, outside of a few space pirates and Tetris blocks, there weren't too many obstacles for us to get through in order to earn the new screw attack upgrade. Now, I can't lie, despite being one of the franchise's most iconic abilities, it's also one of the most challenging ones to use, as you really need to get the timing down pat. I did not have the timing down pat. After a few more dogshit attempts, I finally managed to cross this basic ass gap, and before you knew it, I was a seasoned veteran of the screw attack. It's at the top of this wall jumping section where we find our second Dark Temple key, leaving us with one last key to collect. Thankfully, it's not too far away from us, although it does require some slick movement, as the sphere it's found on is infested by a bunch of tentacles that take any chance to touch you up. Having fought through the worst 5 minutes of our lives, we managed to grab the final Dark Temple key, opening up the way to the Hive Temple. Now, you'd think by this point, with how much we've been through, that there'd be nothing that could possibly intimidate us. But alas, the Metroid Prime series has proved me wrong once again, because what in the fuck is this thing? The boss itself has a lot of phases, the second of which being far tougher than the first, as it requires us to take out multiple spinning top enemies while constantly switching between our 79 visors. The hardest part is just trying to hit his legs in the first phase, as he constantly locks onto us or starts spinning around, meaning we need to change into our Morph Ball form to dodge his attacks frequently. The downside of this is that it gives us barely any time to charge up our own super missiles, making for a rather tedious and long phase altogether. The last phase in comparison is only mildly annoying, as all it requires is a bit of patience as we look to time our jumps in order to get on top of his head. From here, all we need to do is drop off a few little turds, and would you look at that, he couldn't hack the smell. We're rewarded with the final beam upgrade in the Annihilator beam before sucking up the final bit of light energy stored in the dark ether. From there, all that remained was to return to the Sanctuary Temple where we shot our load one last time, ultimately restoring power to this temple as well. Considering we were nearing the end of the game, I wanted to make sure we collected as many power-ups as possible before returning to Umos. These power-ups included things like power bomb expansions, missile expansions, whole house power-ups, and of course energy tanks. Having explored the vast majority of this planet, we make our way back to Umos, who thanks us for restoring power to the 3 temples. As thanks, we get imbued with one final power-up, and boy does it take us from a 10 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. Glazing aside, we're not done just yet. See, Umos mentions that there's one last temple that we need to breach, and this time, we don't need just 3 keys, but 9. Now, if I'm being honest here, we had a better chance of finding steak at a vegan restaurant than these fucking new keys. Not only are they in some of the most rogue spots imaginable, they're also hidden inside these floating ball sacks that we can only see when using the dark visor. It got to the point where I almost was tempted to get Rainbolt's help finding these fucking keys, but alas, I figured it was only right that we do the hard work ourselves. Thus began our tedious journey across the ether as we searched both the light and dark dimensions for these mysterious keys. While searching for these keys, I also made a few detours in which to collect some final upgrades. By this point in the game though, none of the regular enemies posed much of a threat to us as our weapons had gotten far too powerful, and what little damage they did do would oftentimes be healed using the health drops scattered around the area. With grey hair starting to show on my head, we finally managed to collect all 9 temple keys. Returning to the Sky Temple prompts a cutscene to begin where they're placed in their respective slots. This opens up a portal to the Great Sky Temple where we're faced with arguably the greatest evil we've ever come across. Being the penultimate boss of the entire game, it was to be expected that this guy would be tough. What I didn't expect, however, was how awkward most of his attacks were. Even now, I still have no idea how to avoid his tentacle spin attack, and the massive blob he drops on your head does an immense amount of damage should you get hit. His tentacles are constantly moving around, making them extremely hard to hit with our projectiles, and even when his vulnerable spot is showing, it's being guarded by moving force fields as well. Things would only get worse during his second phase, however, as he releases what I can only imagine to be a century-old fart. The idea here is to roll up onto him in our morph ball form and use our own stink bombs to destroy the countless tentacles whipping out of him. This was far easier said than done though, as these tentacles will stop at nothing to hit you back off into that putrid gas. As frustrating as this phase was, the real concern was the fact that I hadn't even reached his final form yet. And considering our life total carried on over from the first to second phase, I just knew I'd be going into this final phase with a concerningly low amount of health. His final form is similar in a sense to Metroid Prime, especially when it comes to having to switch between our different beam attacks to deal any significant damage. Thankfully, a lot of the Emperor's attacks in this phase are extremely easy to avoid, while other attacks, if destroyed, give us some valuable health drops and ammo replenishment. It was fairly tight at times, but we did manage to defeat the Emperor Ing with a combination of Annihilator missiles and quick movements. Before we can truly celebrate, however, there just happened to be one last literal roadblock in our way, and to no one's surprise I'm sure, but Dark Samus acts as the final boss of the entire game. But all things considered, it's actually a pretty easy fight. The timer does add an extra layer of pressure, but even that doesn't stop this from being an extremely easy fight. Dodge her attacks, switch to the proper visor when needed, and hit her with super missiles throughout. Her second phase can be a bit more confusing as she starts spamming this cheesy ability where she will levitate up into a defensive ball, seemingly becoming impervious to all forms of damage while blasting missiles at us. That said, if you know the secret counter to this particular move, then this phase becomes a complete walk in the park as well. With our dark counterpart eradicated for now, we look to escape the crumbling temple in style as we find ourselves back in the light dimension. Having saved yet another planet, we come to terms with the fact that we're now the supreme commander of a Moth army, only to then mock them all with our sublime face card. As we fly back off into orbit, we're once again reminded that this franchise was never going to end with just 2 games. Thus brings us to the end of Metroid Prime Echoes, and again, I didn't die a single time. Meaning so far, both the games we've covered have been relatively easy, and given how dogshit I can be sometimes, this was honestly surprising. But I guess all we can do is see how the last 2 games hold up in comparison. As was teased at the end of Metroid Prime 2, Metroid Prime 3 opens up with the revival of Dark Samus, and because we're somewhat linked to her in some weird ancestral way, her presence wakes us from a 75-year coma. If there's one thing we don't have to worry about though, it's the fact that we still look as good as we did all those years ago. Considering our first two adventures began with some questionable flying ability, Metroid Prime 3 instead looks to teach us about our own ship for once as we begin the game in the cockpit. It's here where we learn about its many features, most of which are completely useless. Outside of the map selection interface, there's very few cases in which we use any other feature introduced in this prologue. That said, our first port of call is on the GFS Olympus, where we're summoned alongside a few other bounty hunters by Admiral Soyboy here. He tells us that we've been tasked with wiping out a virus that's causing computers to shut down across the galaxy. Before he can finish his waffle, the ship is attacked by a space pirate raid. Fearing for his life, the Admiral begs us to wipe out the intruders, and having witnessed just how incompetent the rest of the crew was, we really didn't have much choice. With that said, as is the case with most prologues, the enemies present in this initial raid are downright pathetic. Honestly, it makes you wonder how they ever thought they'd manage to overrun this ship by sending their most basic ass soldiers. But regardless, we pick up the missile launcher soon after and continue back to the hangar where our ship lie waiting. As luck would have it though, our ship wasn't the only thing lying in wait. The Berserker Lord is a perfect example of a prologue boss. He's slow, his attacks might as well heal us with their damage, and for whatever reason, this supposed alien race still hasn't learned not to make their weak points extremely obvious. What I will say is that for an opening boss, he does have quite an extensive moveset, especially once we've exposed his massive forehead. Unfortunately for him though, his forehead was always his biggest insecurity, and with it out for the entire galaxy to see, he thought it best to go out in his own way. This was no time to feel sorry for him however, as we needed to make our way down to Norian to suppress an attack being led by an old adversary. As we make our way through the Federation base, we're ambushed by some absolute fodder, and despite us handling them with absolute ease, we still get our asses saved by one of our fellow bounty hunters. Annoyed, we pushed on, activating the first generator, which only seemed to aggravate the space pirates more as they looked to ram their ship straight into this planet. With time ticking, it was imperative that we activated these generators and got the defense system back online. The only problem was that these space pirates were doing everything in their power to stop us, to the point where Ridley himself was willing to take time out of his busy schedule to try and gobble us up. If that wasn't bad enough, even the second generator was trying to cuck us. After demonstrating our elite tier morph ball skills, we're once again attacked by Ridley and forced into a placebo boss fight where we constantly need to dodge random debris while keeping our crosshairs on Ridley. The added addition of the meter counter does impart an added time limit, but it's far too long to ever impose any real danger. Having shot a few loads directly into Ridley's mouth, we're once again saved by Frozone, who drops us off at the last generator. From here, we joined back up with the rest of the crew, and together we stormed the control tower, only to get absolutely humbled by our dark counterpart. Thankfully for us players, this blast wasn't strong enough to trigger the end credit scene, although it did take us out for a whole month, as we awake in the presence of what looks to be an AI robot concealing itself as a human.
Brother, what's that?
As embarrassing as it was to be KO'd by a single blast, taking that hit did come with its fair share of benefits, mainly the fact that our power suit was now imbued with phase-on energy. This meant we could now enter a new empowered mode known as Hyper Mode. I didn't know it at this point, but this mode was going to carry us through the entire game. From here, we're told to meet with the Aurora unit, and I can't lie, the last thing I was expecting to see was a floating mechanical brain inside a test tube.
What the hell is even that?
Aurora informs us that our fellow bounty hunters had been sent off on separate missions to different planets, yet concerningly, they hadn't heard back from them in some time. Considering our godly status and skill set, we're immediately tasked with tracking each of them down. Our first destination? Bryo. Because of the Leviathan Seed's impact, the inhabitants of this ancient civilization had become aggressive and almost feral, and unlike their Jurassic Park counterparts, these guys were smart enough to craft their very own weapons. With that said, the corruption to their minds definitely chopped off a good few IQ points, as there will be times where these guys will just stand around and do fuck all as you're constantly blasting them with your shots. As we survey the area, we eventually come across our first big upgrade, the grapple swing. Now one thing I did notice when gunning my way through these early areas was just how streamlined this game felt in comparison to the last two. There were multiple instances in the first two games where I was completely lost, yet here I was, breezing through this first area without a care in the world. Part of that was because of our new hyper mode ability, which instantly eviscerated every enemy in sight, but the main culprit was for sure the linear pathways and simple puzzles. Having cleared out every single space pirate on Bryo, we're once again aided by our friend Frozone, or at least that's what we thought. It seems as though our friend here has chosen a side, and unfortunately it's not ours, which can only mean one thing: we'll have to execute him. Rundus here is quite the agile fighter, oftentimes riding around on his ice like he's some kind of figure skater. The idea here is to hit him with enough plasma shots to stun him, which gives us just enough time to once again rip off someone's helmet, exposing their forehead. It's at this point where we can lay into him, and given how strong hyper mode is, it wasn't long before he was down for the count. The good news is that he finally seemed to recognize us, meaning there may still be a chance to save him. I guess not. Despite offering himself, at least he was nice enough to leave behind a gift, and one that's extremely useful as we're now able to freeze segments of lava. Unfortunately, we don't possess the right equipment at this stage to push on, so instead we backtracked to our ship and made way for the cliffside air docks once again. Using our new ice missiles, we're able to freeze our way towards this massive statue, who once activated smashes open a path for us towards an even bigger statue. Sadly, getting this one to twerk for us wasn't going to be as simple as leaving a bomb inside their open chest cavity. Instead, we'll have to free him from his shackles by destroying the 4 pulsating cores situated in the surrounding environment. With these shackles destroyed, we're finally able to convince this fat ass to move, revealing a hidden compartment that must smell absolutely horrid. Alas, we must push on, and after finding a cheeky energy tank, we end up in a room that promises a ship upgrade. Knowing these games though, you just know it's not going to be that simple. Having been swarmed by another set of Jurassic World extras, we wasted no time as we immediately activated hyper mode to obliterate the 2 warp hounds. As their name suggests, these assholes like to warp around the place, making them some of the more annoying enemies to deal with. With them out of the way, the rest is just cleanup, and before long, you'd think we'd cleared enough space for the ship to land. Safe to say, I was quite bamboozled at this point, and the worst part was, there was still about 4 or 5 steps we needed to complete before we could open the doors and land our ship. With the world's most complex landing sequence complete, we used this opportunity to fly our way on over to the Thorn Jungle airlock. It was at this point where I finally realized that you could see the reflection of Samus's eyes, and especially her lashes. Not that that has any relation to anything, I just thought it was a nice addition. I'm sure that they did this in the previous games as well, I'm just too dumb to realize. Additionally though, we're made aware of the fact that we're not the only ones with an overpowered ability, as we bear witness to a space pirate entering hyper mode themselves. Now, as concerning as this is, upon seeing this, I just had this unexplainable urge to show him his place. As we pressed on, we came to a halt as we noticed a massive gate blocking our way. Funnily enough, this gave us the perfect chance to test out the new missiles our ship was equipped with. Before we could marvel at the power we wielded though, we were rudely interrupted by a similar looking foe. Apparently this was the younger brother of the same Berserker Lord we dispatched at the start of the game, and given how he started throwing around his own units, you could tell he was fiending for revenge. Tragically however, because he had the same exact moveset as his older brother, we knew exactly how to take him down. With another one of their power units annihilated, the space pirates had grown justifiably concerned to the point where they were sending out whoever was up for the task. This Korak beast might go down in Metroid history as one of the least intimidating bosses ever. The only threat posed by this dogshit Geo is the rider on top, which is why we focused on dispatching him first. Once he's dealt with, this fight becomes laughably easy. The Korak's attacks consist of a miniature hop and a random wave attack that couldn't hurt a fly even if it tried. That said, damaging this beast requires us to roll underneath him and drop a few bombs, which is arguably the toughest part of the entire fight, as the area in which you can move is rather tight, and touching him at all damages you. I can guarantee you that I took more damage just trying to roll under him than from his attacks themselves. Either way, this was a joke of a boss fight, which unfortunately isn't something I could say about this next section. See, our goal at this stage was to use our ship's missiles to destroy the Leviathan shield generator. The only problem was that this generator was protected by 2 mounted turrets, meaning our ship couldn't get in close enough to launch its missiles. It was clear that we'd have to destroy these turrets, which was a lot easier said than done. See, each of these turrets is protected by an army of endlessly spawning space pirates. That's not even the worst part though, because the only way to damage these turrets is to blast the fuel canisters on each side of it, and the only way to reveal these canisters is to pull the latch on the bottom of the turret. It might sound simple, but the constant pressure applied by the space pirates makes it hard to focus entirely on the objective. Even by the time I destroyed the turret, I was left with a worryingly low amount of health. Thank God there were enough smaller enemies and crates on the way to the second turret that let us restore our health, because this challenge wasn't going to be any easier. In fact, the second turret might be even worse, as we need to have all 3 of these levers down simultaneously to reveal the canisters. There's a constant influx of aerotroopers who not only look to blast us, but will actively go out of their way to pull the levers back up. With these never-ending assholes doing everything in their power to ruin our Christmas, we needed to come up with a strategy that would guarantee that both aerotroopers were destroyed at the same time. Their respawn timers give us just enough leeway where we can lower one of the levers, meaning if we manage to take them out quick enough, we can drop all 3 levers without much trouble. The only method in which I could see some success was popping hyper mode whenever these flying bastards had spawned, as we'd instantly eviscerate them from existence. This gave us just enough time to open up the canisters to destroy the second turret. With the turrets destroyed, we can finally bomb the shield generator with our ship, granting us direct access to the Leviathan's seed. Now, as you can imagine, the seed or the core isn't necessarily waiting around for us to destroy it, instead choosing to be guarded by this motherfucker. The interesting thing about this guy is that he can weaponize almost everything. Whether it's his weight or his putrid breath, there's almost nothing this guy can't turn into a decent amount of damage. It's also one of the few fights where we can't abuse the shit out of our aimbot. See, in order to damage this guy, we need to destroy the 3 red orbs on his front and the other one on his back. This isn't as easy as it sounds, however, as the orbs himself will slowly regenerate if not hit for a while. This is then made even harder by him constantly shifting the position of the orb you're attacking, meaning there's hardly a point to locking on. If that wasn't bad enough, even when he becomes vulnerable, the only method in which we can damage him requires us to use hyper mode, meaning we're constantly sapping ourselves of health just to damage this guy in the first place. Thank God a large majority of his attacks could be destroyed for ammo and health, otherwise this fight would be much tougher. As he's defeated, his last supper somehow dissipates into our body, causing us to barf following the realization that he'd been putting pineapple on our pizza. With our guts rearranged, we grab our new morph ball upgrade only to use it immediately to destroy all these sprouted weeds. For whatever reason, this causes the seed to drop out of its own foreskin. Not that we're complaining though, as it makes it all the easier to obliterate it with its own phase on blast. With the Leviathan destroyed, we turn our sights towards Elysia, one of the coolest planets to ever grace the Metroid franchise. This place doesn't just look cool though, it's also extremely fun to traverse as we grind our way across to each island. What I will say is that the town didn't offer much resistance outside of a few maintenance bots and these sorry excuses for tin bots. Because this place was so beautiful, I wanted to make sure that we found every last valuable. This wasn't always a good idea, however, as soon after, I'd found myself getting bum rushed by a bunch of tin cans and a new foe called the Steam Lord. This guy is extremely unique as he stays invisible for the majority of the fight. The only time he's visible is when he's repairing other service bots, meaning we'd need to destroy the army of tin bots before switching our focus to her. Thankfully, the tin bots move like they've never been programmed to do anything other than walk slowly in a straight line towards our plasma shots. Eventually we deal with this absolute clusterfuck of a room, and in its wake lies another energy tank. As we worked our way through Skytown, I couldn't help but feel grateful that all the lifts and interfaces still worked despite the planet feeling decrepit. What I wasn't grateful for was the battle drones that all of a sudden had a problem with our movements. As is the case with many of the enemies on this planet, but these drones are absolutely useless as we simply pull them with our grapple and cause them to crash. What isn't so simple to defeat, however, is this defense drone. You'd think a large bulky unit like this would be fairly stationary, but instead, this thing loves jumping up to the high ground, which just makes hitting his tiny moving antennas even harder. Luckily for us, its attacks aren't anything to worry about. In fact, I'm pretty sure there were points where I'd been hit by some hot honey instead of an actual attack. This was one of those boss fights where it didn't exactly feel like one, yet it must have been, as following its defeat, we're given yet another morph ball upgrade. With the boost ball added to our skill set, we're now able to mimic the behavior of a hamster who's been forced to use the wheel to provide power to other applications. As mundane as this feels, charging these cannons is essential as it not only opens up fast shortcuts between certain islands, but also scratches our thrill-seeking itch. We're also able to use this power to open up the door to a familiar looking face in the Aurora unit. This one's apparently been corrupted with brain rot though after spending too much time on TikTok, and it's up to us to attempt to repair and reprogram the unit. Luckily, all we really needed to do to repair this unit is fight off a never-ending horde of tin bots.
Okay.
Joking aside, once we've dealt with all the bots, we upload the vaccine, turning the Aurora unit sane once again. Before we are even given a chance to talk to it though, another one of our old allies gets in the way, slicing open the plot to the point where we need another upgrade just to fix the damage done. Speaking of damage done, our ship was getting the shit beaten out of it by Gore, who embarrassingly couldn't even stop it flying despite it taking a solid few hours for us to get back to it. Just for that alone, he deserved to be terminated, and for how intimidating his mech suit was, he was fairly easy to deal with. He only has one lethal attack in my opinion, and even that is fairly easy to dodge once you have the timing down. His weak spot is extremely obvious, and when vulnerable, he doesn't handle the damage from our hyper mode beams too well. Ironically enough, Gore here drops the plasma beam, which just so happens to be the perfect tool for melting the circuit boards he destroyed back in the Aurora unit. As thanks for restoring the connection to Skytown's network, we're given the map data of this area and told to seek out the Federation landing site far to the east of Skytown. Before that though, we needed to travel back to Brio, where we used our new plasma beam to melt the ice surrounding the statue's mouth. Don't ask me how, but one thing led to another, and before you knew it, we're entering a portal to the icy plains of this planet. After breaking multiple ice sheets, we stumble across the infamous screw attack once again, and considering the practice we'd gotten in Prime 2, there was no way I was screwing this up again.
It's been a weird these past few months.
Having had to master this screw attack for a second time, we war jump our way back to our ship before heading back to Elysia. With our bolstered arsenal of equipment and abilities, we could now make it to the Federation landing site. We must have had a spy tailing us though, as the space pirates threw just about everything at us in an attempt to stop us. Whether it was armored space pirates or whole ass ship, it was clear that they didn't want us anywhere near that landing site. Because we're the main characters though, it was inevitable that we'd reach it, and after landing our ship, we concocted a plan to open up the entrance to the Leviathan Sea. Now, not to toot my own horn or anything, but this plan was so unique, so out there, that I wouldn't be surprised if we became known as a genius across the galaxy. Tell me, how are we supposed to penetrate a protective force field that shields the Leviathan seed? I'll tell you how. You bomb it.
Well, duh.
First, we need to collect 3 bomb components, some of which are guarded by old bosses, while others have us fighting through an entire research lab fending off our old pals, the Metroids. Even after completing the bomb, our work isn't done just yet, as we need to transport it over to the shield itself. As we're doing so, we are raided by space pirates and bombarded by their ships, and given how there's somehow a constant sandstorm circling the spire, it definitely makes the whole situation a lot more tense. Even so, we push through, and after a relentless battle, we finally managed to drop a fat-ass bomb on this pathetic shield. With the core exposed, there was no better time to strike. The only thing that really stood in our way was a floating mechanical mite. Now, this thing might have been called Helios, but it didn't carry the same aura as the literal sun god. The general strategy is rather straightforward. See, we have to wait for him to start charging up his ultimate move. Now, this might sound counterproductive, but it's here where he's most vulnerable. Using our Seeker missiles, we're able to destroy his swarm bots, leaving him vulnerable to a barrage of hyper mode shots. His attacks while in this erratic state aren't too difficult to strafe, making for a rather easy boss fight all things considered. Defeating him unlocks the hyper missile, which we immediately use to expose the core, allowing us to destroy it in the same manner as we've done before. You'd think we'd done enough at this point to save the galaxy, but alas, it seems as though there's one more Leviathan to take care of. And awkwardly enough, this one's made its home on the pirate homeworld. As you'd imagine, the pirate homeworld is the most toxic and unforgiving planet so far, and it's not necessarily due to the enemies present. Sure, there's some resistance in the form of space pirates, but honestly, it's nowhere near as much as you'd expect from their base of operations. That said, because there's a Leviathan coursing phazon through the planet, the space pirates have managed to infuse that into their abilities, making them far tougher than they've been up to this point. As we made our way through the pirate homeworld, we not only unlocked the X-ray advisor, but we also came across a lone survivor that had somehow managed to keep himself alive despite having dogshit aim. Despite demonstrating god tier teamwork with our new friend here, it seems he couldn't hack the fact that he was a brain-dead NPC, and out of a fit of jealousy, he looks to take us out from behind in order to become the main character. He's soon revealed to be Gendrada, who would go on to be one of the toughest boss fights in the entire franchise. Not only is Gendrada extremely agile, making her difficult to hit, she's got some pretty cancerous attacks, like this grab attack which I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to stop. If it wasn't obvious enough at this point, I was playing these games using Prime Hack, meaning I was using a mouse and keyboard. Last time I checked, there's no way to imitate the shaking of a Wii remote on a keyboard, meaning I just had to tank this attack in its entirety, which wasn't something I could afford to do that many times. Thankfully, she takes the form of a few other bounty hunters, who are honestly far easier to deal with than her true form. It was definitely a tough fight that required us to switch between our visors, and it was one of the few fights where I genuinely thought I was going to die. That said, I managed to lock in, and after a sketchy last phase, we managed to defeat her. With our new grapple voltage, we managed to gain access to the subway, which cost a limb to use. For now, we've done all we can on the pirate's homeworld and instead need to make our way back to Elysia. Upon our arrival, we hear that a new roller coaster has opened up in the area, although much to our disappointment, it seems to be a self-driving one. Having acquired the Spider Ball back on Elysia, we now have the means to bypass the toxic downpour on the pirate's homeworld. I thought it best we grab a few more upgrades back on Brio. These upgrades include the usual missile expansions and energy tanks. With that done, it was time to return to the pirate's homeworld, where we used our new spider-like abilities to unlock the hazard suit. This suit protects us from the toxic rain that continues to pour on the pirate's homeworld, meaning we can finally focus our attention on dealing with the Phazon-infused pirates without having to worry about environmental damage. Whereas Grand Trader was one of the hardest boss fights, this next one might be one of the easiest. The only difficult part of this entire fight is trying to hit these goddamn tentacles as they're constantly moving around beneath him. His attacks are downright pathetic and he might as well be a regular enemy with how easy it is to get damage on him. Leaving this room takes us to another train station, which inevitably leads us to, well, another train station.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Eventually we end up at the mining site where we start, well, mining. Doing so grants us access to the main cavern where we're supposedly trapped and ambushed by space pirates. This battle here is actually a lot tougher than I expected, as it requires us to whittle down our enemies' health without killing them. See, every now and then, a vortex will open up in the middle of the room, sucking us all towards it. The enemies present will hold on for dear life, and it's up to us to knock them, causing them to fly up into the vortex. Pre-damaging them makes this process a lot faster, and the only way to escape this room is to destroy the source with their bodies. Doing so rewards us with the Nova Beam, a crucial upgrade that we'll need to take on a rather tough foe later on. For now though, all that remained was making our way towards the GFS Valhalla, an old warship that had been completely decimated months prior to the start of this game. As you'd expect, this ship was crawling with tough enemies, both in the form of Metroid hatches and commando pirates. That said, by pairing our new Nova Beam with our X-ray visor, we're able to identify the weak spots of most of our enemies, one-shotting them in the process. We reunite with Admiral Dane, who brings with him some of the worst cannon fodder known to man. The worst part about all of this, however, is that we need to keep these brain-dead soldiers alive as we find our way through waves of space pirates. And while I tried my best, some sacrifices had to be made. Thankfully, only 4 troopers needed to survive to open the final door, granting us access to the Leviathan Seed here on the pirate's homeworld. We made our way on over to the pirate homeworld seed, where we come face to face with the final guardian. Again, you've got to give Ridley some props here. Despite getting his ass handed to him on a platter time and time again, he never does give up. That said, this is most definitely not the hardest iteration of Ridley we've ever faced. He certainly has the largest moveset out of every version so far, but he's not exactly that tough to take down. Most of his attacks are easy to avoid, and while he's cancerous to hit while flying around, he doesn't take many hits in hyper mode before he's down for the count. Using the hyper grapple rewarded from him, we're able to engage in some stretch play with these tentacle things, which was pretty awkward. But not as awkward as destroying the seed with a single button press yet again. With the final Leviathan core destroyed and the galaxy safe once again. Wait, what do you mean there's still more to do? Yeah. So apparently there's one last mission for us to complete, and it involves traveling to the planet Phase and attacking Dark Samus and her army of space pirates head on. This planet really does take it up a notch, as upon landing we're overcharged on Phazon, which has both its benefits and its cons. For one, our attacks are all supercharged with Phazon, meaning they essentially obliterate every enemy instantly. The bad news, however, is that should this bar ever fill up, we'll instantly die. Now, as alarming as this realization was, there were ways to decrease the amount of Phazon in our system. Collecting health drops was the main method, meaning I looked to annihilate every enemy we came across. This of course included Dark Samus, who looked to do something she could never do in Prime 2, get rid of us for good. Sadly for her, she must have not got the memo that we were supercharged at this point in time, as she could barely tank our normal shots. She has a few cute tricks like her cloning ability, which required us to switch to our X-ray visor, but again, these abilities weren't exactly lethal. The real challenge actually shows up after the fight though, as we watch in horror as Dark Samus merges with an Aurora unit. This phase of the fight, much like Dark Samus, isn't too bad, although it definitely requires more precise aim. The scary part about this whole final boss though, is the fact that our Phazon bar is constantly increasing. Even after defeating the Aurora unit and moving into the final phase against its head, we're still forced to make do with the progress on our bar, which was extremely sketchy as the head had some of the toughest attacks to avoid. Not only that, but its one weak spot was on the underside of the back of its head, making it extremely hard to get any consistent damage on it. Our best bet was to charge up our cannon and hope that we could trace its movements while it's using particular attacks. This ended up working in the long run, although we were extremely close to overloading ourselves on Phazon. With the Aurora unit destroyed and Dark Samus out of commission for a second time, our fleet was able to get out of this area in the nick of time as the Leviathan evaporates behind us. And just like that, we've completed yet another Metroid Prime game. Although one thing has remained constant, we've yet to die a single time.
You know what they say though, there's a first time for everything, and considering the amount of missiles and gunship fire we have to avoid just to reach the prologue mission, it may very well happen in this game. As is the usual at this point, we quadro somersault our way off our ship before laying waste to the usual cannon fodder. We once again spend 90% of the prologue scanning random shit instead of actually fighting, although the little fighting that we do isn't too bad as the Space Pirates dispatch couldn't be more useless. Realizing they were getting their asses handed to them, the Space Pirates decided to send in their big guns, only for said big gun to get immediately infected by a rogue Metroid, turning him into the first boss of the game. Now, as far as bosses go, Abarax is definitely one of the best in the entire franchise. Not only does he have a diverse moveset that challenges us to use all of Samus's abilities to avoid them, they also deal a decent amount of damage for this point in the game. Not only that, but he's fairly tanky, requiring far more missiles and plasma beam shots than you'd expect. That said, he still is a prologue boss, meaning we'd dusted him into the waste bin without much trouble. What we hadn't realized is that we were fighting directly in front of a strange artifact, and it was this very artifact that the Space Pirates were hunting down. Upon realizing this, Silex and his army of Space Pirates burst through the wall, and despite us completely outplaying him, he managed to hit the artifact, sending the whole base into limbo as we're transported to a mysterious tower. With no Uber drivers available, this was looking like one of the worst holiday destinations imaginable. See, we'd once again been sapped of our best abilities. Annoyed, we cautiously followed this floating testicle into the tower before us.
The fuck you say to me, you little shit?
And while it was a rather scenic adventure, nothing could prepare us for the acid trip we were about to experience.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Nothing. Me? Just hanging around.
As confusing and disorientating as this experience was, we did learn one thing about ourselves, that being that we are without a doubt the most important person on this planet. Having inflated our ego to unheard of levels, we come across a pedestal that when scanned summons Chadayant Vulun, the last sex worker of the now extinct Lamorne race. He tells us that their race had almost single-handedly been taken out by STDs, and the only way in which they could hide their fucked up legacy was to compile it and teleport it to another planet using a master teleporter. Unfortunately, they hadn't managed to complete this task before being wiped out, meaning it was up to us to collect the 5 master teleporter keys and preserve their reputation. To start, we're tasked with reaching the Lamorne sex dungeon, which strangely enough is located deep within a perilous jungle. Forget STDs. This jungle's got plenty of weird creatures that'll do anything but leave us alone. I guess we should be thankful that there hasn't been much movement in these parts for centuries, as it caused most of these creatures to de-evolve. This means they're incredibly weak, barely being able to tank even a few plasma shots. Before long, we reached a strange looking door, which we could open with our new psychic visor. This grants us access to our first power, the psychic glove, which we almost immediately use to attract balls to our hands. Now, not to toot my own horn or anything, but when it comes to handling balls, I can't say there's many better than me. Following this, we trace some random shit, grab our first energy tank, and approach what seems to be a fellow human. Luckily, it seems he recognizes us, and while we appreciate the attention, his premature ejaculation couldn't have come at a worse time, as it lured in some rather tough enemies. These here are the Grievers, feral variants of the Lamornes who are extremely agile to the point of being able to dodge our plasma shots. The main difficulty with these guys though is the fact that there are about 50 million of them all swarming us in a very compact area. With our asses clenched, we manage to fend off these rampant Grievers, and after helping this dumbass down, he leads us straight to the missile launcher. With our newly appointed minion following behind us, we make our way deeper into the jungle. Before long, we stumble across a massive bridge with a colossal dungeon at the end of it. Yet this is no time to be marveling, as we're ambushed once again by these fucking Grievers. Again, this is a hard fought battle, as these assholes seem to crawl out from every direction.
Miles might think he's helping with his tiny ass pistol, but if we're being real, we'd get more help from a tadpole with an eating disorder. Our performance on this bridge had impressed the ancestors so much that they awarded us with the control beam. With it, we're able to guide a shot straight into the symbol, opening the door to the main chamber of the dungeon. This becomes our main base of operations moving forward, and after restoring power to the area, we come across another set of statues, one of which turns us into a hologram who tells us that we'll need to collect some green energy crystals that are scattered throughout the planet. These will become important later on. For now though, we pushed on into the Garden of Remembrance. Yet despite its name, there was no need to remember anything. Carvex acts as the first real boss of the game, and similarly to Abarax, he has quite the array of attacks. That said, a lot of these attacks can be destroyed for healing orbs, and the few that can't are also extremely easy to avoid. The fight makes use of our new control beam, which could have been challenging had time not slid to a halt every time we used it. Defeating Carvex awards us with the Psychic Bomb, but before we can put it to use, we first needed to collect the Master Teleporter key. With the key in hand, we return to Miles, who pretty much tells us the same thing we already knew about the keys. Having reconfirmed his incompetence, we bounced our way into this bomb slot, where we dropped our first fart of the game. The air pressure escaping from our arse cheeks was enough to raise the door, leading us to an abandoned pod launcher, which we used to launch ourselves towards who knows where. After a 10-hour flight, we exit our pod only to find ourselves in the barren desert. This desert is a makeshift open world, with each main area seemingly connected to it in some way. It's also here in the desert where we'll collect the large majority of the green crystals that we'll need later on. For now though, we made our way to the closest looking building, and while this seemed like the smart choice, the fact that we're immediately ambushed by these robots would suggest otherwise. Now, to my surprise, or should I say shock, these Cybot soldiers do an immense amount of damage with their beam attacks.
Holy look at all this damage!
This wouldn't be too worrying if there weren't so many of them at once, and the fact that they separate and fly around in the air makes it all the more challenging to avoid their damage. Even after taking them down, there's no obvious route into this mysterious building, so instead we need to sneak our way in, destroying glass as we go. Eventually we run into a cutscene that goes on for an uncomfortably long time. Having run a whole ass marathon in that tunnel, we finally learn that we're inside the Vault Forge, an old manufacturing plant used to create sex toys among other things. In what's becoming a regular occurrence, we need to find a way to power the 3 towers in this forge. The good news is that the elevators seem to be functioning, meaning we could travel down to the bottom of the first tower. Surprisingly, there wasn't much resistance in the form of enemies or creatures just yet, which definitely raised some concerns. That said, we pushed on, and after making our way back outside, we rolled our way down to the end of this contraption before dropping off a bomb in its socket. This allowed the lightning rod to peel back its foreskin, finally getting that jolt of electricity it's always craved. With lightning surging throughout the tower, it's only right that the machinery gets back to building those toys. Wanting nothing more than to get involved, we disguise ourselves as a part, which puts us back up on the higher floors. After taking the elevator back up the tower, we are made aware of the fact that the construction machines weren't the only thing powered back on. It's a good thing these tank bots were made out of lithium, as it meant they could easily be lifted by our missiles. With the power back on, we can finally interact with the bike's terminal, which in reality was an automatic clothes changer as we came out looking fresh as shit. This new suit comes with suction pads on each arse cheek, meaning we can finally tank the G-forces produced by this bike without having to worry about being ripped off it. We take this thing for a quick test drive only to end up at the second tower, where once again, we need to restore the power. Similar to the first one, this sees us traveling down a few elevators, all while fighting off some more Cybots. The further we descend, the more unique the enemies get, and while the Cybot teleporter was a joke to defeat, the same can't be said about Silax here. Honestly, he mimics the movements of Dark Samus, as he's fairly agile, making it hard to hit him with our own attacks. That said, his attacks are completely useless, as well as being incredibly slow. The only one to cause me any problems was his tornado attack, and I can't lie, it took me a hot second to realize that I needed to switch to Morph Ball form and bomb his ass to make him stop. Outside of that though, he wasn't too hard to take down, and there was a very good reason for this.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
With another energy tank collected, we sped over to the final tower, which surprisingly acted as a tutorial for the bike, as we were tasked with completing multiple tasks which range from completing a lap in a certain time limit to destroying enemies in a specific way. Mastering the bike's controls was only the beginning, as we now had to make our way down to enter certification. Little did we know that entering certification meant facing off against an obstacle that had been teleported from the Mario universe by the Master Teleporter years ago. Because it's a dumbass obstacle, he doesn't have much in terms of lethality, with his only scary attack being this electric whip attack. Outside of that though, as long as we turn into a ballerina and skip around the room, there's absolutely no way this guy's even got a shot at hitting us. Defeating him grants us the psychic boots, meaning we're finally able to double jump once again. From here, we grab our second Master Teleporter key before being thrown back into the searing hot desert. It was at this point where I decided to explore this dead-end desert in the hopes of discovering some secrets. Along the way, we made sure to collect any green crystals scattered around, and we also spent some time down in some ruins where we picked up a few more upgrades. Unfortunately, we couldn't access as many areas as I'd like, as the large majority of them require a specific weapon to crack the locks on them. Instead, we made our way to the closest building, which opened up into a magma-filled cavern known as the flare pool. It also provided the perfect bridge to test out the acceleration on our bike. Yeah, so apparently we were going well beyond the speed limit, which forced the security guard on shift to collapse the bridge to avoid an accident. As inconvenient as this situation was, it didn't stop us from foraging around the area. In doing so, we acquired a fire chip, a device so complex that only a tier 4 nerd would be able to crack it. Thankfully, we know just the guy, and after fiddling with it for a good while, Miles was able to install a new elemental shot into our plasma cannon. With the ability to cook medium rare steaks now integrated into our right arm, we spent some time re-exploring Fury Green, as there was quite a few upgrades we could now collect, including some shot expansions and of course some missile expansions. With our arsenal upgraded, we once again take the express pod back to the desert, where we experience the first ever green golden shower. Legend has it that this makes the enemies that patrol these deserts even tougher, although I never really felt that to be the case. Before heading off to Hypothermia Town, I decided to grab a few more upgrades, with the most important one being the charged fire shot. With this bad boy, there was nothing that could stand in our way.
2 seconds later.
I am fucking shitting myself.
After getting our ass handed to us by this pack of never-ending wolves, we're miraculously saved by yet another soldier who parrots the same glaze as Miles did when we first met him. The facility here seems to be run down, which is unfortunate, as there are certainly traces of the Master Teleporter key in the area. That said, all hope wasn't lost, as Takabi had a solution, and you'll never guess what it is.
There. That must be the generator room. I think we can bring it back to life.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
With yet another generator to hunt down, we waste no time aura farming the fuck out of another landing sequence as we make our way through the icy cold facility. Our psychic visor truly does get worked to the bone in this place, as we're not only tracing lines to unlock new abilities, but our first objective has us rotating numerous codes, which we can then use to figure out how to unlock these blockers. Along the way, we fight off some random machines, although for the most part, there didn't seem to be anything too worrying down here. Just like their jungle variants, these ice grievers are incredibly agile, making for a rather tense section of the game, as they're constantly jumping out of sacks as we make our way back to Tokabi. Even once we reach Tokabi, we've still got to fight our way through an onslaught of these grievers as they break in from all angles. Having just survived another ambush, we're immediately thrown back into danger as we take this massive elevator down into what could only be described as a boss arena, and this one looks far more intimidating than the rest. As Narcissist would say though, you should never judge a book by its cover, because Keratos here might be one of the easiest bosses we faced in this whole entire video. As was teased in this entry cutscene, Keratos here likes to spend a lot of time spinning around the arena, although he's nowhere near as fast as he was in the cutscene, meaning it's incredibly easy to avoid his attacks. Eventually, he'll charge up a rolling ball attack, which we need to sidestep. Doing so will cause him to lodge himself straight into the wall behind us, giving us direct access to his asshole. It's here where our new charged fire shot shines, as we quickly dish out some heated blast directly up his rectum. Keratos wasn't able to take this anal beating, and after disappearing in a burst of light, we're able to pick up the psychic boost ball. Following this, we collect our third master teleporter key, as well as an ice chip that we find back towards the entrance of the ice belt. Back in Fury Green, we hand the ice chip to Miles, who installs the ice shot into our suit. At this point, we'd also collected enough green crystals in Soul Valley to earn the first of 4 rewards from the altar here. We got some practice in with our new ice shot before spending the next 17 years in the desert. See, while we could technically head back to the flare pool, I wanted to make sure I was adequately prepared, meaning we needed to grab some upgrades like the charged ice shot, and of course an upgrade for our VOLAR suit. This upgrade was so powerful that it quite literally has the ability to shift our vehicle into another mid-drive, allowing us to pass over lakes of lava without breaking a sweat. Once again, we needed to sneak our way in through the back, although it didn't really seem to aid us in terms of the usual benefits like surprise attacks. Having laid waste to this absolute fodder, we come across yet another one, this time however, on our side. Having heard that dig at him, this guy immediately throws us into the closest oven, where we get absolutely cooked due to my dogshit awareness. In a moment of pure genius though, I finally figured out what the fuck I was supposed to do, and upon seeing this, Ezra here decided it was best to stay on our good side. During our travels together, we're interrupted by his side chick, who he'd said he'd moved on from after assuming she'd died. Hearing her voice again though had apparently sent him into lovesickness once again, as he begged us to help find her. Now despite all that begging, it seems as though he was the one having doubts, as we'd wait centuries at each elevator for him to get on. As we worked our way through the facility, we were attacked countless times by cybots, and with each passing fight, I just had to ask myself, why the fuck am I going through all this effort? Eventually we reached Armstrong, and much to Ezra's dismay, it seems as though she fell in love with us at first sight.
Well, Samus, it's really you.
With another minion added to our collection, we joined forces as we fight off a galactic ship that had somehow gotten lost down here. Despite destroying it, the ship smashes up our escape route, causing us to part ways with our new crew. Directions were never our strong point however, and before we knew it, we were in the heart of the volcano facing off against a massive lava snake. Now I can't tell if we were just getting stronger or the bosses in this game were getting weaker, because Fen Norris here might be the easiest boss we've faced so far. Initially, we need to splice these pus-filled pimples on his underside to the point where he gets so annoyed that he decides to fight us head on. This was probably his biggest mistake, as he may have some of the most pathetic attacks I've ever seen from a boss. We don't even need to deplete his health bar completely before it just gives up and flops over with its mouth wide open. This gives us the perfect opportunity to shoot a control beam directly down its throat, causing it to recoil in discomfort to the point of self-destruction. With another so-called guardian obliterated, we grab our hard-earned grapple as well as the third master teleporter key. Unfortunately, our minions, being the useless bums that they are, needed our help once again, which was less than ideal as this place was about to blow any minute. The journey back to the control room was a stressful but simple one, as was the decision to sacrifice ourselves so that these two could escape, or at least that's what would have happened had we not been the main character. Having experienced yet another life-threatening thrill, we decided to take some time off, which saw us collecting a good handful of green crystals out in Soul Valley. As relaxing as this was though, there was an itch biting away at me, daring me to get back into the action, to seek that thrill once again. And you know where that desire led me? Back to the Vault Forge, where we were forced to swing across literal thunderstorms. Our main reason for coming back to this place was for this thunder chip. What I hadn't accounted for however was to see Silex here in its place. To say Silex here had learnt a few extra tricks since our first battle would be an understatement. Sure, he's still got some of his old moves like this quick dash attack, but he's definitely upgraded a good portion of his attacks, now being able to fully electrify the ground beneath us. It's a good thing we just unlocked the grapple, otherwise this fight would have been downright impossible. Either way, following his defeat, we grab another energy tank before returning to Miles, who installs a portable taser into our suit. From here, we did a bit more exploring in the desert, with our main goal being to obtain the charged thunder shot. Now, to access the final master teleporter key, we needed one specific upgrade, which was located back in the ice belt. In order to proceed however, we needed to assume command of this slumbering robot here, and the only way to do so was to taser his testicles in order to show him who's boss. Under our command, he's able to obliterate every single door on this planet, and that's where his usefulness ends, as he can't even break some flimsy glass. Luckily for him, we're used to working solo, and after grappling our way across some dead-end ditch, we enter a room that contains the upgrade we've been looking for. Using this upgrade, we grab a few more upgrades in the ice belt before heading back to the flare pool, where we also collected a few more upgrades. Having spent close to an hour backtracking to previous areas for upgrades, we finally decided to bite the bullet and meet up with the squad outside the Great Mines. Before we can get the elevator working, however, we're swarmed by an onslaught of grievers. Realizing we'd likely be overrun, Tokabi and the super soldier here looked to sacrifice themselves, allowing us enough time to descend into the mines below. As we'd come to expect, but it seems as though everything here is powered off as well, and it's up to us to provide the energy to get things back in working order. Doing so came with its own share of risk, however, as the sound and movements of the drill attracted some of the toughest enemies we'd faced so far. As if these more grievers that could attack from anywhere weren't bad enough, not long after we came across an even stronger variant.
I'm in danger!
These brute grievers are incredibly tough, having extremely large AoEs on most of their attacks. If that wasn't bad enough, these assholes will also call on their smaller counterparts to help out, making for an absolute clusterfuck of a fight. That's essentially this whole area though. Every single room, you're just being swarmed by countless grievers, and most of the time you can't even tell what the fuck is going on. In fact, the only reason we're even still alive is because our friends have been sacrificing themselves along the way. First it was Ezra, who covered up the hole with the drill, followed by Armstrong, who collapses the tunnel behind us in order to stop the onslaught of grievers. We then left our robotic friend here for dead as we pushed on further into the mines. Their sacrifices weren't in vain, however, as we did manage to find the altar that had transported us to the final master teleporter key.
2 seconds later.
Now, unlike the last few bosses, the Omega Griever certainly puts up a good fight. Not only does he have some rather tough attacks to dodge, all of which slow you down, but he's impervious to most of our attacks outside of our super missiles. Even after taking him down, this motherfucker still has one last trick up his sleeve, in which he licks the fucking shit out of us, dealing massive damage. He then starts going absolutely berserk, making it extremely hard to hit his weak points and finish him off for good. With that said, we did manage to defeat him, granting us the Psychic Power Bomb and the final Master Teleporter key. Upon leaving the mines, we learn in what can only be described as pure cope and plot armor that every single member of our crew survived this journey. Realistically, all that's left for us to do is find a few mech parts out in the desert which Miles can use to construct a mech to break the force field covering the Chrono Tower. Before any of that, however, there was a good few upgrades located back down in the mines, like power bomb expansions, shot expansions, and energy tanks. We also made time to travel back to Fury Green, where we deposited the rest of our green crystals, earning us the remaining upgrades, including the Legacy suit. With our wardrobe upgraded, we go on a few dates with Tokabi, who gives us a teleporter chip. Miles is then able to use this chip to develop a few teleporter patches, and it's now up to us to locate the lost mech parts throughout the planet. Some of these mech parts are easy to find, while others are consumed by massive beasts that we have to defeat. These range from massive sandworms to massive molten mites, but if there's one thing these absolute units have in common, it's that none of them really put up much of a fight. With the mech pieces collected, we return to Miles, who uses them to reconstruct the massive mech. We then make our way over to the Chrono Tower, and using the mech's cannon, we're able to vaporize the force field protecting the tower. With nothing standing in our way, we roll our way towards the top of the tower until we finally reach the Master Teleporter. Surprisingly, we're able to get close enough to the teleporter to deposit the Master Keys without anyone looking to interfere. In fact, we might just be able to complete our goal without anyone interrupting. You just knew this idiot was going to show up in some way or another, and credit where credit is due, because he's most definitely the toughest boss in the entire game. This fight encompasses 3 whole phases, with 2 of them being rather tough. The battle begins with Silex circling the area inside this strange bubble that he uses to slam down on us with these weird tentacle arms. The good news is that we have our whole crew here to help distract him, meaning we can focus on improving our dogshit aim as we attempt to gun down said tentacles. What I will say is that this phase is extremely long, as we need to wait out 4 different phases of elemental dragons, each of which have different attack patterns. seconds. After reducing his health to a certain point, Silex pulls us into some vortex in what turns out to be a very similar fight to the one we had against Ridley in the first game. This phase is extremely simple as all we need to do is dodge his attacks while keeping our crosshairs aimed at him the entire time. After dropping his health bar to half, we finally land on some solid ground, signifying the beginning of the final phase. This phase in particular is where things get somewhat scary, mainly due to the wide variety of attacks at his disposal. They also do incredibly high amounts of damage, which is concerning considering most of them we've never even seen before. The worst attack by far is when he transforms into his own version of the Morph Ball and gains supersonic speed, far superior to our own. To make things even worse, whenever he hits us in this form, he steals an energy tank from us, and the only way to get it back is to pump him with our own boost ball attack. Our main offense came in the form of the supercharged Thundershot, as it did a decent amount of damage while also being able to stun him at times. After what felt like a lifetime, we finally managed to shock Silex into malfunctioning, thus saving the day once again, or so we thought. See, despite getting his ass kicked over 3 phases, this arsehole still had enough power to decimate half our team. In a panic, these useless sods did the right thing as they sacrificed themselves to help us escape back to our own world. The game ends with us once again flexing our face card as we hang our old friends' dog tags on this flourishing tree of incompetence. This brings us to the end of Metroid Prime 4, meaning it's time we ranked each of these games from easiest to hardest. Now usually this is an easy task, as we just look at the death counts of each game. This time however, we've run into a bit of a problem, that being that I hadn't died a single time during our adventures. That said, there definitely were a few close calls in certain games, with some having far tougher boss fights and areas to traverse. Now, in my personal opinion, I do believe Metroid Prime 4 is the easiest game in the entire franchise. Its bosses, while complex in design, didn't do too much damage, and while the game did contain some annoying units like the Grievers, facing them throughout the entire game did allow us to adapt to their movements and attacks quite easily. Up next would be the original Metroid Prime. As you'd expect, this game had far simpler bosses in terms of their designs, making most of them a complete joke to fight. That said, those dark sections where we're forced to use the thermal visor as we fend off countless Metroids and space pirates definitely raised my heart rate to unprecedented levels at times, and I consider Metroid Prime to be a tougher final boss than Silex as well. This then leaves us with 2 games. Corruption definitely had its fair share of tough moments. See, I'd much rather take a chainsaw to the hairline and go bald than disable those turrets on Briar once again. And the game also had some decently tough bosses in the form of Gandrada and the Aurora unit. With that said, it doesn't really hold a candle to Prime Echoes, which features the toughest level layouts, the toughest bosses in the Alpha Blog and Spider Guardian, as well as the largest variety of tougher enemies when accounting for the Ing and Light World enemies. It was without a doubt the toughest out of the whole bunch, which is definitely saying something, as I'd also consider it the best game in the entire franchise. Either way, none of this really matters. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please do consider dropping a like on it. You can subscribe if you're mentally handicapped, and I'll see you all in the next one.